Good afternoon. Welcome to the IOE Pavilion. My name is Tina Morni. I'm the Director of Policy at the International Organization of Employers. It's 1 o'clock, so let's start because we do have our distinguished speakers who also have to run to other panels as well. Thank you for joining us. For those who are not aware of the IOE, we're one of the older organizations. We're 104 years old this year. We represent the voice of business in a lot of international forums, specifically the ILO, the UN, the G20, G7, and OECD. We represent the voice of more than 50 million companies in more than 140 countries, both in developed and emerging economies. We represent not just large companies, but also micro, small, medium enterprises. So thank you very much for joining us. So today's panel will be talking about green skills development, key enablers, and experiences from business. As you know, upskilling, reskilling, and skills development at all levels and across many sectors is a decisive factor for a successful and inclusive green transition. According to ILO data, if we go towards a global low-carbon economy, 24 million jobs will be created by 2030. So the technical vocation education training systems are finding it really, really difficult to catch up with the emerging demand. We can promote a culture of lifelong learning, but also that takes a different mindset, a change in mindset of all stakeholders. Active labor markets are also trying to bridge the gap between the skills mismatches and the skills gap, but there is still a shortage of skills, and this is something that we've heard from all the companies and our member federations. From the IOE side, we launched a business alliance for green skills at COP29 in Egypt, just to enable companies to work together to advocate green skills among policy stakeholders. We also promoted two publications, one in cooperation with Business at the OECD on company studies on what works and what doesn't work, and also country case studies. And this is to promote a green skills policies framework. So without further ado, I understand that Alan and Karen also has to leave right after the panel. Thank you very much for joining us. You will see there on the screen Mr. Alan Blue, the Vice President Product Management and co-founder of LinkedIn. Thank you very much for joining us. Karin Svensson, the Chief Sustainability Officer from Volvo Group. Thank you for being here. Ms. Annika Ramskold, Chief Sustainability Officer from Vattenfall. Thank you very much for being here as well. And Mathilde Mesnard, Deputy Director of Environment, Director of the OECD. Thank you. Welcome to all of you. So let us now go into the questions. Each of the panelists have 5 minutes or so to answer the questions. We will not have a Q&A. We will reserve the Q&A towards the end of our session, 10 minutes before the end, 2:30. We will have a photo session right after the panel before our guests go off to the other panels. And then we will have a second lineup of speakers right after this as well. Okay. So, Alan, with regards to the latest LinkedIn report, their insights on green skills, can you just tell us a little bit about the promising ways employers could develop green skills more and how to anticipate future needs? Over to you.
Thank you very much. All right. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So good afternoon. Every year for the last few years, LinkedIn has released a report about green skills and their distribution around the world. It's based on LinkedIn's own data. So we have about 1 billion members in LinkedIn's network, and that gives us an opportunity to look at the skills which exist all around the world, as well as job listings. So it represents demand for skills. So just some short facts about what we've found out. So the first thing is that the demand for green skills is growing at about twice the rate of the supply. So right now, we are already seeing really intense competition for people who have green skills. So that could be everything from installing solar panels or agriculture. It could also be things like carbon accounting, or how do I change the way I write software in order to be more energy efficient? So there's a huge number of green skills distributed across the universe. We know that the intensity of that competition is only going to grow. from where we are right now. So the real question is, how do we deal with it? And I think the answer is there's a lot of different things that need to happen, and it's going to be different from place to place, depending on what the environment looks like for workforce development, for skills training, and the willingness of employers to participate in the training. One really bright spot, which I think might point the direction that we should move, is that when we look at green jobs, very frequently they look like today's jobs, but with a few skills which are different. So if you're doing accounting, the difference between being an accountant and being a carbon accountant is actually not that big. So that's actually an amazing opportunity, yes, for higher education, sure, but also for companies to invest in reskilling their current employees. So every company which builds a transition plan, which allows them to think about how their business will be different, can simultaneously build a workforce plan. And that workforce plan can include things like, how many of my current employees can I reskill in order to ensure that I am able to make the transition I want? And good thing for employers and for the employees is people can stay with their same company and bring all the knowledge, relationships, and everything they have internally. But also, it's a lot cheaper for employers to invest in education than it is to enter the market for these very rare employees. So hiring somebody right now is extremely expensive compared to the amount it would take to reskill someone who only needs to take on 3 or 4 additional capabilities. So there's a huge opportunity for employers to participate. And for LinkedIn, the thing which is most interesting to us is how do we encourage employers to take on that responsibility? Yes, we LinkedIn, we offer some services. We have LinkedIn Learning and so forth. But how can we get employers to think more about reskilling their current workforces rather than doing maybe what they always would have done, which is reach out into the open market and try to pull people in? So there are many ways to do that, and many of us here at COP can actually help. So first, you could, when people are contributing to the development of NDCs, so many acronyms, of NDCs, is it possible to basically say, well, we actually have, it is valuable for us to get back from companies the skill needs, just so companies are thinking about that reskilling opportunity. Second, if you're in climate finance, consider talking to the companies in whom you have invested about what are the needs for reskilling your existing employee base in order to be able to make a transition to a non-carbon economy. There's a lot of pressure that we can put on just by drawing attention to the need for this reskilling. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Alan. Really good insights in sharing, especially the workforce plan in terms of retaining also talent. It's so, it's really interesting to hear that point. And also, I take this opportunity to thank you also to LinkedIn for sponsoring also our pavilion. It would not been possible
Absolutely.
Without your contribution.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So now, without further ado, now I'd just like to if we could pass the mic to Karen from Volvo Group. Karen, can you share us the ways of how Volvo Group has been training workers and how to ensure the necessary skills and expertise when it comes to green skills? And can you tell us also a little bit of insights on how you work with your suppliers who need to retrain their workers as well?
So first, thank you for having me here. And the Volvo Group, one of the world's major manufacturers of commercial vehicles, we are in the middle of, I would say, probably the biggest transformation of the company since we started 100 years ago. So of course, skills in relation to the transition is really, really crucial for us. However, I would like to point what you said, Alan. We don't see this as a revolution, it's rather an evolution. And I think for us, it all starts with having a very transparent and open dialogue about this transition, because what this also can do is to create quite some fears. And I think we see that in general in society. So I think to talk about it, to create awareness about it, is important. That goes internally for us, but that also goes when we talk to suppliers. That goes for when we talk more to the general public, when we talk to students, etc. And this is not different to any other kind of transition, but I think it's important to point that out. I would also like to point out that actually for us, being in a very traditional business, doing trucks, maybe not seen as the most progressive to a lot of young people. I think the transition into more sustainable transportation has actually been a great opportunity for us to attract even more talent. So for us, the issue of finding these has maybe been less in certain areas. So I think that's also something I want to talk about. Then when it comes to reskilling and upskilling, I think it's absolutely what you say, Alan, that we have done a lot of work with our own people to, especially during COVID, we took the opportunity to reskill big parts of the engineering community to be much more up to speed. Then, of course, this whole transition, it doesn't go from one day to another. So when we talk about going into electric transportation, for example, we say that we have a three-pronged approach. So we will work with battery electric vehicles, with fuel cell electric vehicles, and with the internal combustion engine, but then filled with something else like hydrogen or e-fuels or biofuels. So we are not shifting from one day to another. So we will still need the old competences to be there. And I think that's also important to point out that it's not old skills, they are to go out, and new skills to come in. This is something that we need this, the whole spectrum of competences. From the operations side, I can say that today we can produce an electric truck at the same line as we produce a diesel truck, which also makes it very good from a workforce perspective, that we do not need to change sort of the workforce. It's not a completely new factory that we are building. We are creating, due to a very modular approach and platform, we can use the same facilities that we have. Just say a couple of words about the supply chain, because I think that is an important point that where we probably can do even more work. We do, of course, have very close dialogues with our suppliers on a very regular basis, where we talk about what we will require from them today, but we also talk what we will require from them more in the future, something that we call inspirational ambitions or something like that. So we talk to them what we think, what will happen, talk about how we see sustainability evolving from a people perspective, from an environmental perspective, from a resource perspective, but also from a business conduct perspective. So I think we are trying to do different things also in relation to the supply chain.
Thank you very much, Corinne. And the key words that I got from you was the word transparency and dialogue. When we talk with the trade unions, our counterparts, it's a real fear. Their real fear that am I going to lose my job? Am I going to, how am I going to get another job? It's really important to have the communication strategy, I believe. Karen, you wanted to add?
Yeah, and I just want to underline how important that is, because we are seeing some tendencies that we have parts of the general population not interested in the transition, maybe just because of these things. So I think that's really the basics that we need to start with, that to get everyone on board, really.
Thank you very much, Corinne, for sharing that perspective, and that's something we could also advise our member companies as well, I think, as a policy recommendation. Thank you, Corinne, and thank you also for your generous support for the IOE Pavilion. Let's now move to Annika. Thank you for joining us. My question for you is, can you just share with us a little bit about Vattenfall's experiences in green skills development in the energy sector in particular? How do you handle the skill shortages and measures to upskill workers?
Well, thank you very much, and also thank you for having me here. For those that are not aware, Vattenfall is an energy company active in Northern Europe, so we both produce or generate, distribute and sell electricity, heat and cooling and energy services. But the way we've gone about it is, and I'm so happy that you point that one out, Alan, is that we have made a very clear transition plan where we are shifting our entire portfolio quite dramatically. And just to illustrate that, we have since 2017 actually reduced our emissions by 69%. And that can only be done by phasing out coal plants, shifting fuels from natural gas and coal into biomass, into completely other sources, build a lot of new renewable capacity, entering into solar, battery flexibility. So we are really leaving a number of old ways of working and entering into new fields. And therefore, the reskilling has been extremely important. And in parallel with doing this clear transition plan, we have done a workforce planning. So we've identified all the different areas that we need. So a lot of more engineering skills are needed, technicians both to design and run and build, but then also to maintain. There is a lot of interaction with IT and other areas, so that is also new areas that we need to explore. And we have managed to create a lot of energy internally and have a very good dialogue also with our unions to say we are in a transformation, but when we do that, we give our employees an opportunity to really reskill. So to take one example, we closed a coal plant in Netherlands, and there were more than 1,000 employees there, or 1,500 actually, and we managed to offer them new jobs, pretty much all of them, or they had some trainings to enter into other fields, and then they could maybe be working with one of our suppliers where we also needed engineers and others. So that's a key thing. But I agree with you. We constantly, if I only isolate to Sweden, we need to recruit 2,000 new employees every year due to the growth and also a lot of older people retiring. And that is a huge challenge. So how do we attract them? That's when having a very clear strategy and purpose is extremely important that attracts those. But we see also a general trend in society. It's not enough young ones that want to go into engineering, and we will need that to be able to construct and build everything. So to continue to show how important engineers are to do this transition is really key. And here we've tried a few unconventional things. We have started a reality show in public TV in Sweden where we showcase employees working to build transmission lines, to build wind power. And it's amazing to see that students or applicants to that, they used to be 2 years back 5,500, now we're up to 7,700. So, and many more females are also entering into the field. So just make it known that it's, because it is unknown. You spoke about that. Who wants to go into a traditional boring sector? You need to make it more fancy and attractive. So that's one way. But then also very much about how we as businesses work together with academia and those that are training, so that we also tell them what type of skills are needed, and that we secure that there is also not only that we reskill and upskill, but also get the new talents that is needed. So I think those are a few of the things that we've been doing that really attract. But another one is also, I realized I want to mention one other. It's about general project managers and those that are good at business development. They don't necessarily need to know the energy business that much. So we also on a yearly basis bring in trainees, but sort of those that have knowledge from other industries and have worked there maybe for 10, 15, 20 years, even nurses and others. We bring them into a training program. And that has been extremely successful, because they then start spreading the word about, oh, the energy industry is actually quite interesting to work in. And I could do that even if I've been a nurse or I've been something else or in the restaurant business or whatever. So also doing that type of reskilling.
Well, thank you, Annika. I'm glad that you touched about that. It's a mindset shift, isn't it, when it comes to promoting this kind of skills in this energy sector. And I like the fact that you shared your idea about the unconventional way of, and I like that you mentioned also the gender component, which is also important in this space where it's usually, according to the data, is male dominated, right? So that's really interesting. But I took away from you, and that's something I think we could share with our members, that the fact that you helped reintegrate those who lost their jobs when you close down the coal mines, and then you help them, okay, it's either through your company or through the suppliers, that's already a good best practice because there was no obligation for you to do that, right,
No.
in according to the labor laws. But the fact that you showcased that, you showed that you are a caring company for those workers who are losing their jobs. Thank you very much. So now, without further ado, let me just move to Mathilde from the OECD. Mathilde, can you just tell us in 5 minutes about the work that you're doing in capacity building and financing, and how can we ensure micro, small, medium enterprises stay relevant in the transition, and how can we incentivize and increase and facilitate the demand for green skills?
Yeah, does it work? Okay.
Yes.
Let me go back maybe to the macro perspective, because it's a lot of what we do at the OECD. So I will argue again for why this topic is crucial for the transition, and then give you the few data we have on skills evolution and how, what needs to be done more at the macro in terms of policies to favor training, reskilling, etc. So first, clearly, I will say some evidence, but they are worth sometimes reminding you that we need to avoid that some workers get left behind, especially those, in declining industries or with limited access to education. Because if you have too many skills shortages, as it was mentioned by Alan, you cannot drive firms' innovation and progress. And also, globally, you will slow down the transition, because the new technologies, they require new skills, clearly. And then all of this has a political implication also, because if you reduce the workers' vulnerability to the transition, then you increase the acceptability of the transition. And we have very interesting data for that. For every 1% increase in unemployment, the percentage of adults who report prioritizing the environment over the economy declines by 1.7%. So in the current political context, that's something really to keep in mind. That's quite important to make sure that we don't have too many people left behind, And what we do at GCD, we have a yearly publication that is called the Employment Outlook. And this year, in 2024, we looked at how environmental policies are changing the labor markets. We have estimated that more than 25% of existing jobs, so 1 out of 4 jobs, will be strongly affected by net zero policies, be it positively or negatively, in both directions. So that means that, the transition will impact jobs much beyond the energy sector, where it's kind of obvious, but in many other professions like bus drivers, construction workers, farmers, etc. So it's at a macro level, it's big. And also what we have seen with this outlook is that the green economy means a shift towards higher skilled analytical jobs. That means that we need more of these process skills. That means such as critical thinking, monitoring, and active learning. And we need more of cross-functional skills. That means like complex problem solving and decision making. Both these skills, like process skills and cross-functional skills, are crucially enabling the workers to quickly adapt to the innovation. So this is very challenging, because these skills are not easily acquired with a small retraining, And we have a few kind of policy recommendations on how to retrain workers towards the green transition. Of course, the idea is to be responsive to the current, but also to the future skills needs. So what you do in LinkedIn, for example, is very important. So we need to try to project what are the expected skills in 5 years, 10 years, which is not necessarily easy. And also we need to make sure that the incentives for participants and providers of training guide the choice of courses towards the future skills, the in-demand skills. And we need also to target the adults whose core skills are likely to become obsolete. And all of these 3 points are not easy to do in terms of how you build up efficient, effective training programs. So at the OECD, we have a kind of a recommendation that countries adopt so-called skills assessment and anticipation exercises, so that to generate information on these future skills and to help to, shape the training programs. So just to summarize, my point is that at the macro level, it's critical to focus on that, because basically otherwise you will slow innovation, you will slow the transition itself, and you will raise the protest against the transition. But to do that, you need to be smart and looking at really the future skill needs. This is not easy. And it's not only like, I would say, technical skills to adjust to new technologies, but it's also the generic core skills of adults that need to be upgraded.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. And employers group at the ILO, where we're the secretary, we've been lobbying very, very hard among the government constituencies about the importance of these core work skills, critical thinking, communications, leadership, all these kind of skills that cannot yet be imitated by AI, for example. We need to really develop that and strengthen that. And we thank you. We count always on OECD and LinkedIn for data. It's a data mine. It's all the data that you have is important for policymakers. So we really thank you for your contribution to the global debate on just transition and green skills. I would like to welcome now on the stage Mr. Pradeep Philippe, the lead partner for Deloitte Access Economics, Miguel Munoz, the head of climate policies and alliances of Iberdrola, Soma Banerjee, Deputy Director General of CII, one of the largest, in fact, the largest federation in India, also IOE member, Roman Botard from the European Training Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us. So let me start with Pradeep from Deloitte. Pradeep, so my question for you is, can you share with us some insights on Deloitte's work on green skills, and particularly the Green Collar Workforce Report? What do you see as the main trends in different regions? And I think that could be interesting for some of our colleagues in the audience. And how you can help clients build and anticipate needed skills. Over to you.
Thanks very much for that. This is such a big problem, made bigger under the scenario where we don't act on climate change. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that. And some of the modeling that we've done, where we challenge the assumption that economies will grow at trend, even if we do nothing on climate change. We find the exact opposite. If we don't do anything meaningful on climate change, then over the next 50 years, the global economy will suffer a $173 trillion problem in GDP. Now, what does that mean? It means that about a quarter of the world's workforce, about 800 million people, are currently now at risk from climate change and the energy transition, particularly if the energy transition is not handled properly. But these figures can appear insurmountable. But what we find is if we disaggregate occupations into skills, and we look at the sorts of occupations that will be in demand under the new structure of an economy that is of lower emissions intensity, so green jobs, emerging green jobs, we find if you break that down into skills composition, we find that about 80% of the skills already exist. So it's not that we are having to invent a whole lot of skills for people for them to make the transition into this new green economy. So this is actually, from an economic perspective, a very positive and hopeful finding, that 80% of the skills that we need in the green transition already exist. So what does that mean then? It means that for a lot of people, we essentially need to give them a little nudge. Right now, when we see jobs disappearing, the whole person disappears with the whole job. Now we can think about a person and the fact that they might have most of the skills required, and we are now trying to give them a small subset of additional skills. Now that is really important for employers and the training system going forward.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. That is really good to hear for employers, because there's a big fear that there's going to be, of course, there are investments needed, especially for micro, small, medium enterprise. They're all worried about the costs because they already have limited capacity and limited resources. So when we hear this information that 80% of workforce already it already exists, that really gives us hope. So thank you very much for sharing that positive data. So let me now move to Miguel from Iberdrola. Thank you very much, Miguel, for joining us. So my question for you is, can you share with us your experience on like how do you find the needed green skills for your project? How do you find this kind of skills? And how do you provide guidance and analysis? Take into account also you have this recent paper with the economist impact. Please go ahead, Miguel.
Thank you very much. For those that you don't know, Iberdrola is a global utility company focused on renewables. We have already installed more than 44,000 megawatts on renewables, focused on renewables deployment, green solutions. So the first remark that I would like to make is that the green transition, an ambitious approach towards green transition, creates jobs. This is quite obvious, no? But we know that from some places it is challenging this. 2 days ago, I think it was released a report from the International Energy Agency with some interesting figures, and there was a very interesting result. For every one job that is lost in fossil fuel industry, there are 2 jobs created in clean industries: electric vehicles, solar PV, wind, etc., all different solutions. So the first element that we have to make clear is that we have to embrace, not only because of climate change, of course, but also thinking about the opportunities in terms of value creation for society, for employment, the green transition. In Iberdrola, we are aware of the gaps that are in terms of employees, that to cover the huge amount of needs that we have as a company that are already investing. And the way that we are tackling this challenge is building alliances, building robust alliances. Sometimes we find a mismatch between the traditional education system with the needs that we have to cover this demand, to already keep the path of investments and creation of jobs in our sector. So we have built quite interesting alliance. One of the most interesting alliances that we have built for 3 years now is with UNICEF. With UNICEF, we signed an agreement 3 years ago, and we have been working to provide skills in vulnerable backgrounds across different jurisdictions. The key main examples are Spain, Brazil, and Somalia. In Spain, for example, we have reached agreements with our suppliers. More than 70 suppliers of Iberdrola have been in agreements with us to provide skills to vulnerable young people. These people are trained, are participating in different areas: solar PV installation, electric charging installation, heat pumps, etc. And after this, they join our company, other companies. They are provided with the skills to work in areas that are needed. In Spain, it's at a high rate of unemployment, and these kind of programs are very well valued by society. Apart from that, in Brazil, for example, we have more than, under this agreement, 6,000 young people has been trained and has been already incorporated to different programs. In Somalia, the program is focusing on creating abilities, skills for entrepreneurship. Sometimes it's, of course, crucial to create this kind of soft cross-cutting, I would say, better cross-cutting skills for entrepreneurship. We cannot make it alone. When you are a company that needs this skill to keep your investment, to contribute to the green transition, you have to build alliances with different organizations. We are also building alliances with some training programs in Spain to provide the right courses. Sometimes we create digital platforms to include. This is one of the key messages. Also, I think that it's important not only, I fully agree with what has been said, not only to focus on things that will be new, the skills are already there. And sometimes we have to go beyond the skills. And there are other aspects, mental health, uh, take into account the social backgrounds of the youth that are in the programs. You have to understand well the needs of the person that you want to train. In our case, under this agreement, all these aspects has been incorporated. In general, I would like to highlight that we have to innovate to do that. We have to build alliances, and as Iberdrola, this is part of our core strategy to get this to fill this gap of employees.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for sharing your perspective. And it's good that you also gave examples on what kind of alliances that you have. And UNICEF has a very good reputation. So indeed, it does help to have this unified voice and to collectively contribute to promoting green skills. And something interesting that you mentioned was entrepreneurship skills. How do we generate the next generation of entrepreneurs that create more jobs and could create add value to society? I think this is so important and so key. We always push for the word entrepreneurship in our ILO conventions or recommendations or resolutions. It's so important to promote entrepreneurship in this regard. Thank you very much, Miguel. So let me now move to Soma, our colleague from CII. So my question to you, Soma, is what is your engagement on green skills? And can you just tell us a little bit more about your initiative, the CII Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development?
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me. I represent CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry, which almost represents 65% of India's GDP. We have about 8,000 members in our organization, which includes big, large, small, medium companies. And so we really have the whole gamut and spectrum of companies who are going into job skilling, etc. I'll just give a small introduction first on the work we do, and then I can come to your question. So India, as you know, is a land of 1.4 billion people and growing still. Now that is taken as a boon, but it can turn into a bane if we don't have jobs and livelihoods for them. So it's a very big focus area for India, for the government as well as for industry, to see how we get our people employed and have their livelihoods protected. Now, no one can deny that there is a transition going on. There are some industries which will phase out with time, and the newer industries and newer skills are required. What does CII do? Because we are involved with industry, number one, there is a ministry now under the government of India on skills and entrepreneurship. On entrepreneurship, this was not there a few years ago, because it's recognized that a lot of new younger generation do not want to just work in companies, but want to start their own ventures. So that is being cultivated and promoted to a large scale. And I'm glad to say that a lot of venture capital funds, etc., are willing to promote the startup culture in India. CII works through the national skill councils in various sectors. So across the spectrum, whether it is in steel, whether it is in fabrics, textile, green jobs, etc., the whole gamut of industry, we believe in working with skilling, which helps in employing people. For energy, and particularly the Center for Sustainability, which works with companies to improve their sustainability, we actually help companies become a part of the sustainability course. So what happens is companies play a role in developing the course. Once they develop the course, they also offer training in their workshops or apprenticeship in their companies. And once they are trained, it makes sense for the companies to employ those people going ahead. Here again, the government of India has recently announced apprenticeship policy by which the government is paying a subsidy to those companies who who are employing people as apprentices. And CII is very involved in all of this because we are an industry association and our members are actually employers of different gates. But like my panelists and the earlier session has also said, in all of this, I think just transition is a very important aspect. We have to see that people who are probably having to learn new skills and their vulnerabilities of losing jobs are addressed as well. We cannot have a whole lot of people who suddenly become vulnerable because the world is changing. We have to see how we take them along. I was given a very nice example by someone who was wanting to buy a EV car, which is the done thing in transition. He said, I'm so for it to buy an EV car, but if my car stops tomorrow, where is the roadside mechanic to look into my car? Which is true because most guys are your ICE mechanics. So we will have to therefore look at these aspects also when we're looking at the transition. And CI is very happy to be a part of all of this. And I thank once again the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Soma, for sharing your experience. And you mentioned apprenticeship, and we have not mentioned that yet today. So I think that's so important. It's a win-win for both the apprentice, and it's also a win for the employer because the apprentice can learn the trade, and then also in some cases earn as you learn, you know. And then from the employer side, they also can see access talent already, you know. So they go ahead, Soma. You wanted to add?
Yeah,
go
sorry,
ahead.
this was very important because it's a gender point of view. And being a woman here, I need to say that.
Please.
So in India, there is this village which is totally done by solar mamas. All the women in that village have become the technicians and the entrepreneurs. And they're called solar mamas because they run the solar industry. They train next generation of women for this. And this is an example for the whole world and the country to see. And they have usually participated in all such conferences because they really share what they did. It's a transformation. And the women who run it are called solar mamas.
Thank you very much for sharing that story. That's very impressive. You must be so proud to be part of this process. So thank you very much. And you mentioned also the Skills Council. For those that are not aware, usually employee organizations are one of the social partners. So they are the ones influencing and shaping labor laws and policies as well, especially when it comes to skills, because CII would be the closest to the labor market. You know what are the challenges being faced by micro, small, medium enterprises, and that's a window to work together with governments and other stakeholders in order to move the needle on skills development, upskilling, reskilling, and also promoting a culture of lifelong learning. Thank you so much for that. So now let's move to Roman from the European Training Foundation. Roman, my question for you is, can you share with us your experience in engaging the private sector, including employee organizations, and how these collaborations have helped improve training systems?
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm really happy to be here with you. So the European Training Foundation is an EU executive agency that does research on labor markets and education in low and mid-income economies. So I want to answer your question by picking up on what has been just said, and
Please,
I want to start with the alliances. So we look at this as a skilling ecosystems, and so skills development is not a single responsibility of a certain actor, but it is, you know, an entire ecosystem. So of course you have the training providers, but you also have the government bodies, not education obviously, but also labor, social protection. We talked briefly about inclusion. Industry, they set the goals, they give visibility to employers, as well as the employers who understands the skills demands best. And so one of the things that we do at ETF is try to support the establishment of these skilling ecosystems, because we find that in low and mid-income economies, certainly at the level of regions, they are very much lagging behind, and a lot of the actors operate in silos. So just having them sitting around the table and discussing their needs, their individual needs, is already a great step forward in order to understand the big picture. And often what happens is that once you formalize that, we call it the Sector Skill Council. And so the establishment of Sector Skills Councils often is based on first understanding the situation. So we do a skills demand analysis. There's different methods to do that. I won't go into it. But once you have understood what the demands are, and of course this is a both quantitative but also qualitative work with the employers who help us understand the statistics that we gather, then at that point you get the other members around the table and understand how best to deliver these skills. And often, as we've discussed before, and it was mentioned by previous panelists, there's the issue of let's say, technical skills that can be best taught in a apprenticeship setup or in a vocational education, and often these are rather, I'm not going to say simple, but you can basically get that training in maybe less than a year. And the previous speaker, Alan Blue, was mentioning the accountant versus the carbon accountant. It's a great example because an accountant can get training into carbon accounting in about 6 months. Now, that's in our view, this is a little bit oversimplified because green skills are, of course, a spectrum of competences and attitudes and behaviors and knowledge, and you need to break it down into its building blocks in order to really be able to address it. So yes, you have the technical skills which are occupation specific, such as the ability to set up a solar system. You can learn that in about 6 months. But you're not going to learn that unless you have foundational STEM and notions of physics, understanding digital skills, knowing how to work in a team, etc., etc. Those are the enabling skills, and they're just as important as the green skills. They enable you to get the green skills. And then even more important, you also have and you mentioned that yourself, the mindset. You know, understanding the complexity and embracing sustainability principles, having a biocentric vision of the world as opposed to an anthropocentric. If you think that the economy revolves around people only, then you're likely to not really look into nature-based solutions. If you have a biocentric vision of society, then you will understand the value and the advantages of nature-based solutions. So these are really important dimensions to discuss in our skilling ecosystem so that we don't oversimplify and think that any either young learner or mid-career professional who's just looking to upskill can simply tick the box on a couple of green skills and move on with their career. It's much more than that. And as much as while you can get the technical green skills that are occupation specific in a few months, building your values, your moral foundation, that's a lifetime. You start from preschool and it lasts your whole life. You develop your values throughout your life. So this also brings back to the issue of lifelong learning and adult learning, which again in many economies, certainly the low and mid-income ones, is really lagging behind. It's below 1%, the percentage of adults who go back to school per year in these regions. So I will leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Roman, and for highlighting about the learning crisis that we actually have also, and the importance of this ecosystem, because we are not alone. Business cannot do it alone, governments cannot do it alone, and that's linked to what Miguel was saying. We need to work together, build alliances so that we can move towards a common goal. So without further ado, I'm now going to open up the floor to questions. We're going to pass around the mic. So if you could just raise your hand, if you have any particular questions for any of the speakers, please introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and it could be a question, it could be a reflection, it could be a comment. Please, madam.
Thank you. Actually, I have many questions.
Please, take advantage and introduce yourself and which organization
First,
you're from.
my question to the gentleman. My name is Suhair Abu Salem from Ecube Denko, and we are focusing on decarbonizing one of the high-emitting industries, which is cement. So my first question, please, what are those missing 20% skills that you identified, that 80% of the skills are are available now, but what are those missing 20% skills? And my second question, shall I ask them all together or? Okay. My second question to anyone of the panel is, what do you mean by green skills? how green is green and not green is not green. So, okay. My third question, and also is open for anyone who would like to answer. Now we are all here because we are not on track, as simple as that. The world is behind. And we are all having a specific target to stay on the 1.5 pathway up to starting with targets for 2030 and then to be relevant to 2050. But 2030 is 5 years from today. So what we need to do now from employer perspective on the people factor of the business. So these are my 3 questions.
Usually I take more questions from the audience, but because they're so rich, if you can pass the microphone to the rest to answer the question. I believe Roman wanted to answer the question on green skills first, and then we'll pass the microphone to the
briefly,
others.
what are green skills? It's a very good question. In fact, through our research and work, we've concluded that the term is actually limiting because there's no such thing as strictly green skills. And what we call them in our reports, I mean, we still use the word green skills for these events and just as a communication tool. But we call them green skills for the green transition. So skills that would either help you decarbonize or improve the sustainability of whatever economic process you're working on. And so you can break it down into 3 parts. One part would be the technical skills that you need to operate green technology. Typically what my colleague was mentioning now. Then you have the enabling skills. So they're not job specific, but you need them to enter that world. So STEM, ITC, AI, undeniably, working in a team, adaptability. And so those would be the enabling skills. And then I was going to say at the bottom, not at the bottom, just as importantly, and I just mentioned it, the moral foundations and the values that go with it. Do you understand solidarity? Do you understand equity? Do you understand the issue of gender? If we do not address these societal barriers, we're not going to fix climate change. So they're just as important as understanding which angle should be your solar panel on the roof. And yet they're all called green skills, I guess, for communication purposes. I'll leave it at that.
You asked a question about the 20%. So let me try and explain it this way. For most economies, the bulk of jobs, the majority of the jobs, come because there's demand. If there's insufficient demand or activity in an economy, jobs just don't exist. Now, here we are talking about a transition of the type of demand that exists in the economy. But it's not all brand new. So if we can ensure that economies don't slow too much because there are damages to the environment, you can keep demand growing in the economy for all sorts of consumer jobs, manufacturing, finance, services sector, etc. So let's break that down a bit. There are some jobs that are in high energy emissions intensive areas. You can see that some of those jobs will be transformed and are at risk because they have to be transformed. Second is there are some jobs that are just dependent on the climate. If you work outside on the roof of a house all the time, right, in a warming economy where there's more severe weather patterns, your job becomes more at risk. You can't stay there and work as much as possible. And then we find that there are some jobs that are just, as economies grow, there is a demand for them in retail, etc. And this is the bulk of jobs and skills that exist in an economy. Finally, you get this area where there are people who are doing jobs. You're a plumber, and now you become a green plumber because you learn about water efficiency. So this gets to that second question of yours about how do you define green skills? It's easy and it's not so easy. So when we think of, for instance, a lot of jobs and a lot of industries, where learning a couple of extra technical skills, like in plumbing, learn more about water efficiency, for instance, right? There will be a lot of demand for plumbers with those skills. But this is just an additional incremental skills addition. And finally, there are a whole new set of jobs that are emerging. Fuel cell technicians in green hydrogen. There are some jobs that are brand new which have a whole lot more skills that we haven't yet developed. So when you put these things together, you realize that for the majority of jobs in an economy, the skills will already exist. This is where we get the 80% from. The 20% comes from brand new net zero economy jobs that we haven't really addressed to date.
If I could just add to what you heard, uh, within CII, for instance, we have 11 centers of excellence. Now, there are some which are dedicatedly working towards sustainability. So, for instance, we have a center for water sustainability. What is the skill of that center? They go and assess the water availability and usage in a certain area. And then they have a tool which they have developed called WattScan, which uses the satellite also, and tell you how to become water neutral. So that means it is a way of learning that you don't take off more water from the ground, you give back some water through various ways of rain harvesting, etc., and you be water neutral. Similarly, we have another center, Center for Green Buildings. Now, in that, the technical people will tell the building construction people how to make the buildings sustainable. The cement you use, the architecture so that natural light flows in, and many such ways in which green buildings or buildings are more sustainable. So these are all newer ways of skilling as well as newer tools of moving into this transition way.
Thank you so much. There's a gentleman over there who has a question. Oh, would you like to apply?
jump
Please,
in,
please go ahead,
very
Miguel. I
briefly,
apologize.
very briefly.
Please go ahead.
I think I wanted to jump in on the last issue that you have highlighted. Now, at the end of the day, 2030 is very close. And the issue is that we need to jump up in this transition, in this clean transition, to I think that is 4.5 trillion of needed investments by 2030 in energy transition. What can we do? We as a company have a clear perspective. You have to devote resources to training. We have a strategic plan for 24 to 26, and we will devote 68,000 hours of training to our employees, and we will make alliances and work with different stakeholders to recruit more than 10,000 new employees to comply with this strategic plan. Of course, it's challenging, but we have to accelerate all that we are doing because we are not meeting the goals. Yes, we fully agree.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Sir, please introduce yourself. Which
Well,
organization you're from?
my name is Mahdi Ali. I'm from Somalia. I work with the Minister of Labor and Social Affairs as senior advisor. And everything that you all four spoke about are relevant to what I do in the ministry that I work with. I've also here a gentleman from my country who work with together in different programs, vocational training programs. And I have a lot of questions, but my only one question points to both of you, Soma and Miguel. I'm from a country where you have 75% of people are younger than 35 years old, and 20% unemployment, ravaged by conflict a long time ago. But getting back to its feet now. And what we are trying to do is to ensure that these youngsters get some kind of a skill so that they can join the workforce. We understand one-on-one, I mean, you train someone, and out there in the market, probably there is no job for that young person. So what we are doing is to make sure, to train them to become entrepreneurs. And that's where you two are coming. So probably is an understanding or best practice of what you do and how you do that might help us understand to do better what we do and ensure that more young users get to the employment as self-employment so that they can help and give work to another. So it branches out to maybe 2 or 3 or something like that. And Miguel, you mentioned that in Somalia you're working with entrepreneurs. That's exactly what we do. So if you can elaborate more on that. And Soma, I'm impressed that you have Minister of Skills and Entrepreneurship Skills. This is a very fantastic ministry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question because it's very close to my heart. Um, you know, entrepreneurship was not such a fashionable word in India a few years back. I mean, today we are really big on it, but it wasn't so many years back. And it was propelled by the youth because so many younger people are coming. And I think it's the mental makeup. My own son wants to be an entrepreneur as he progresses in life because he wants to create something. He wants to be his own boss, right? So now what we needed is an ecosystem which encourages that. What are the big things that an entrepreneur needs? One, he needs the right ecosystem to be innovative, to be willing to be accepted even if he fails. That's a very big thing because you can't succeed without failing if you're an entrepreneur. You need a system, you need an ecosystem which will accept and encourage failures, which was done through policy interventions and the ecosystem. Second, finances. That's a very big thing because I may come up with a great project in the lab. When I want to commercialize it, I need finances. So here again, I think companies played a very big role. They gave these, platforms where people could come and present their business cases. Youngsters who would come and show that this is how I want to run the business. And then they were mentored by some companies. So there were senior people within the industry who would mentor these younger guys, tell them how to develop a business model, tell them how to, you need a team. You can't be a single owned entrepreneur. How do you get a team in place? How do you look into the skills of that team? So this entire ecosystem is built. It's like a building block, you need all of this. But the first thing you need is an ecosystem which will allow such entrepreneurship, which will help budding youngsters try out these things. And I think now, I can tell you in India, such things are coming in at a very tender age. We are seeing entrepreneurship happening in schools. So in school, academia also, younger students of highest, like 7th, 8th, 11th, 12th, they're being encouraged to come out with ideas. There are things called ideathons and hackathons and all such things on various subjects so that we don't stop the thinking process. It's only when we encourage the thinking process and we help mitigate the risks. The biggest challenge for any entrepreneur is taking the risk on themselves. How do we help meet those risk challenges is what we are trying to do. And in CII, because we are a group of industries, we try to help influence policies, tell the government, work with NGOs, work with think tanks to help do this. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. Of course, I cannot disagree, but the first thing under my point of view to have a humble approach when you approach this kind of challenges. You have to understand well the social context, the ecosystem, the challenges that youngs are facing in these countries. Iberdrola is, given this humble approach, we know that we as a company cannot go to a country to say, oh, we have here the solution to this. And we are collaborating with UNICEF in this program in Somalia. There are a small team from Iberdrola collaborating with UNICEF. I have a fluid conversation with them, but I don't know all the details. But I can give you some remarks. They are more or less 650 people that has been trained under this scheme. There is a gender approach. 60% of the youngsters are women, because we think it's important. They have started focusing on cross-cutting skills, economic, understanding digital skills, these kind of skills, because sometimes, has been highlighted here, these are essential skills to start an entrepreneurship project. And of course, this project, I think, has been for 3 years, and they are talking collaboration to escalate and to work for more years. Now I cannot give you more details because I am not the person on site, of course, but we are open, of course, to keep it posted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miguel. We have a question in the back. If you can just pass along the microphone for us. Thank you so much. Please introduce yourself and your question.
Hello, my name is Martin Baxter. I'm from IMO. We're a membership association for sustainability and environment professionals. And one of the things we've done actually is establish a green careers hub to showcase different types of employment that contribute to the clean energy transition. And actually we have an example from a young person in a video clip who's motivated to set up their own business and sees the opportunity to set up their own business through training on green technology installation. So speaking to your point, I've got two questions. The first is that Alan Blue made a really important point about the need for a green workforce transition plan to accompany your net zero transition plan. And our view is that as we come for the next set of NDCs, that each country should also be bringing together a green workforce transition plan to deliver on their ambition, because implementation is critical. And so that's something that we're calling for, and I'd like the panel's views on that. The second is that we agree and we recognise that the green transition should be net positive for jobs, but those jobs are not evenly distributed geographically. And so one of the concerns that we've seen raised by those who are protective of the incumbent industries is that the planning of the workforce transition in places doesn't happen. So you end up with industries closing down and the transition plans for workforce not in place. So I wonder whether the panel has any thoughts.
Sure. Thank you very much, Martin, for that question. Indeed, the skills component is missing in the NDCs. If you look at the last NDCs round, it was only 38% mentioning skills. So we would count on you and colleagues here to really amplify. Please talk to your government and just, don't forget about the skills component, because that's linked to employment, right? So please go ahead, Roman.
I wish to build on that, and so yes, we have the data. There's been assessments of how much skilling and education and training are present in the NDCs. Of course, it's not enough at all, but I think it proves the point that we've been discussing throughout this conversation. Really, is the idea of alliances and skilling ecosystems, and the fact that these NDCs have been largely prepared by ministries in charge of climate, without discussing it with the Ministry of Education or Labor and other important stakeholders in this regard. Should they have discussed that with them, then they could have found out that, look, you're not going to achieve this unless you train another 2,000 engineers, and you need, I don't know how many thousand plumbers, et cetera, which in turn would be based on having a thorough skills demand analysis in time that allows you to plan accordingly. So I fully adhere to what you've said. In fact, we have a panel tomorrow to make exactly that point to the NDC pavilion. So I just wanted to say that.
100% agreed that we need to have employment plans as part of the next set of NDCs. One additional thing for us to think about, there is a worrying trend globally where anti-migration policies mean that labour mobility will start to slow down. Now this is a real problem, because we need to think about this issue in terms of the exporting and importing of the energy transition. That is not just capital, not just finance, but also people and their skills. And I think the world will recognize that the cost of this transition will skyrocket as countries develop anti-immigration kind of policies. So that's one worrying trend. The second is, which is why this COP is so important, if we can get the finance flowing to where the resources are for this energy transition, which happens to be in countries that are still developing, then we will create the sort of jobs that we need. One of the results from our work was, while I said there were 800 million jobs at risk, if we get this transition right, there are 300 million jobs that can be created. And where will they be created? They'll be created in Africa and in the Asia Pacific primarily, which are the two areas where those parts of the world have the most to lose from climate change, but have the most to gain from the transition.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with him. Since both of them have said 100%, I'll just say 500%, reflecting the whole panel. So I think it's a very important point. It also touches the social aspect of the energy transition, which is very important for acceptability. I mean, we can't have it till people accept that it is something I need to do. And if I'm going to start thinking at every point that I'm losing my job because of this, I don't think I want to accept it. So it's important that we take care of things. It's very important, like you said, that it has to be job positive. We have to see that job and livelihood positive is something which we have to do for energy transition. And like he said, it is the developing world and it is the global south. Energy consumption will go up in these countries. We are still developing, and India is one of them. Africa is another one, and many others like that. We're still growing, and our energy consumption is very low to do. So if you want us to really take energy in a sustainable way, use energy efficient ways, please be more generous with the funds that you owe. I really think they owe it to this world because it is their duty to see that planet is protected. Thank you.
Very briefly, only a remark. I think that it's important also to keep always the community at the center. When you are closing down a coal facility, you have to, in some way, use your power to collaborate, to open conversations with the key stakeholders, unions, NGOs, local actors. There is a very interesting policy tool that is called Just Transition Agreements. In Spain, there has been a very interesting experience to build this trust on communities within the transition.
Thank you, Miguel. Indeed, the word trust is so important. I understand Soma has to excuse herself because she's going to run to another panel. We do still have 15 minutes left, so let's just give applause to Soma for being with us. Thank you very much. And then we'll continue with the questions. Unfortunately, we do have 2 more questions from the audience, and then we'll go back on the side. We do have some food and coffee and tea on the side. Please, Mr. If you can introduce yourself and your question.
Amr Nader. I'm a chemical engineer and I work in high emitting industries, cement per se. And I'm a CEO and co-founder of a company, so entrepreneur, as said. And I have postgraduate education from MIT in technology and from Columbia on business strategy. So all what we are saying here, and just to for me to understand, because I'm not a human capital person, and there is a lot of things that I could not grasp here. So one is, I think we are mixing a lot of skills between Industry 4.0 and climate and sustainability. This is one thing. And we are mixing also some skills between business promotion, which is or business upgrade or business uplift in the world, the global business skills, which moved from corporates to SMEs, and then generated the entrepreneurship, which has nothing to do with climate. So they are not green or not green. So the Industry 4.0 part is some skills that has nothing to do with climate and would have happened anyway. The second one is entrepreneurship, which is business world impact that again has nothing to do with climate. So this is my point of view, that we need to put things under their own names, because this is delaying decarbonization. This is derailing. And from the skills in NDCs, I've worked with 5 countries so far to develop their NDCs from an industrial point of view. And I would say that the skills part, the capacity building part that we're missing here, that is climate related, is climate science driven. If people doesn't know what is CO2, what is recycling, what is required for, they will not be either green. I'm sorry for the plumbing example. A good plumber is a good plumber. And I'm a chemical engineer that works on so a miner will be a miner, whether he works in coal or works in cobalt. It will always be a miner. So So he doesn't need new skills, but he does need to know why is he moving out of coal to, I will just close with 1 minute example that happened in Philly, US, which is one of the biggest coal states in USA. Those people, someone with this human capital approach and design, decided that the coal miners need to understand and learn IT to be programmers. So they are all out of job on both ways. They, of course, did not become programmers. And of course, they have lost 50 or 60 years of experience. Miners that was working on coal, not shifted to other mining. So this is a very critical human development. It needs to be taken care in a very serious approach, and it has to be put in the right terminology and the right direction. So thank you very much, and I'm sorry.
Maybe if you could pass the mic to one more, then I will close the questions. This will be the last question. Thank you. Madam.
So my name is Milou. I'm a journalist working for the German-based news outlet Clean Energy Wire, and my question is specifically for Roman, because you mentioned STEM skills that are needed, but Europe, in comparison to a lot of other regions in the world, is very much lacking in people getting these degrees, especially women. So my question would be, how is the continent trying to solve that? And is part of that equation also migration? So getting skilled workers from outside of Europe? And then also coming into what you said earlier, how is that being heard by more anti-immigration sentiments that are rising in Europe?
Thank you very much. So if we can pass the microphone back to speakers. Thank you for your questions.